going to teach the Sunday school lesson, and Brother Hutchins is going to preach for us in just a little bit. So we got a blessed morning together. Come ahead, sir. You ready?
Give it a second. How's that? A bit better? All right. So we're going to go into a lesson 11, 2 Kings. We're going to be in chapter 8. We've been looking at the life. We started out looking at the life of Elijah. How do we know Elijah has passed? Been taken up into heaven. We've been following Elisha. And at the end of this lesson, Elisha is also going to be gone. So we're not to that point, but that's where we're going to end up with this particular lesson. So I know last lesson, what was one of the things that we really talked about initially? It was a miracle. You all remember what happened? Y'all like me, you're forgetful, aren't you? Remember the axe head? The axe head floated. So Brother Wesley, you got a group here that believes axe heads float. But they do, don't they? They did. So it's interesting. You know, the things, just the little pictures, the little snips that you see as you go through these lessons. And that's kind of what we'll see today. I said our lesson outline, it's a good outline, but you have to do a little bit of digging sometimes to, I guess, get more of the picture for the lessons. But we're going to look in chapter 8. We're going to try to look through verses 7 through 15 this morning there in 2 Kings. And the title of the lesson is Jehu Reigns, Elisha Dies. And with the teachers, they kind of give the story away, but I'll share it in. Some of the objectives for the lesson, for this lesson, is to see that King Ben-Hadad, and he's the king of Syria. We learned it the last lesson. He's sick. He's going to be killed. We'll see how that plays out. Hazael, being his servant, he'll become king of Syria. Jehu become king. Something that we found early on it was going to happen, but it hadn't happened. But remember the death of Jezebel was prophesied. Well, that's going to take place. So we'll see a lot of things that God said was going to take place, and they do take place. We'll see that Elisha dies, and then he's dead and his body alive. So we'll look through these, but I want to read 2 Kings chapter 8, starting in verse 7. And I guess the first thing I thought about when I started reading this and who it was about is sometimes God just allows time to kind of get people's attention. And I think that's what he's done here with King Ben-Hadad. He has allowed time, and he's allowed him to see some things and to kind of change his mind, I think, to a point about Elisha. And you see that right off in first two verses here. But he says, and Elisha came to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, was sick. And it was told him, saying, the man of God is come hither. And the king said unto Hazael, he says, take a present in thine hand, and go, meet the man of God, and inquire of the Lord by him, saying, shall I recover of this disease? So Hazael went to meet him, and took a present with him, even of every good thing of Damascus, 40 camels burden, and came and stood before him and said, thy son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, hath sent me to thee, saying, shall I recover of this disease? And Elisha said unto him, go, say unto him, thou mayest certainly recover. Then he goes on and says, howbeit, the Lord hath showed me that he shall surely die. And he settled his countenance steadfastly, speaking of Elisha, until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. And Hazael said, Why weepest thou, my lord? And he answered, Because I know the evil that thou wilt do unto the children of Israel. Their strongholds wilt thou set on fire, and their young men wilt thou slay with the sword, and will dash their children, and rip up their women with child. And Hazael said, But what is thy servant a dog, that he should do this great thing? And Elisha answered, The Lord hath showed that thou shalt be king over Syria. So he departed from Elisha, and came to his master, who said to him, What said Elisha to thee? And he answered, He told me that thou shouldest surely recover. And it came to pass on the morrow that he took a thick cloth and dipped it in water and spread it on his face so that he died. And Hazael reigned in his stead. So just a little brief story, but a lot, I guess, several things in it that we could probably pick up on. First of all, we've picked up on it that it's the same Ben-Hadad that we read about in our last lesson, and it's the same Ben-Hadad that sought to have Elisha found and brought to him. Remember, they surrounded the place. They thought, well, we've got him. But then they didn't have him. The soldiers were blinded, and they ended up taking him to Samaria, right in the middle of enemy country, enemy territory. So again, it's the same king there in verse 7 that had sought to capture and slay Elisha. But now things have changed. He's old, he's sick, and now he needs something from Elisha. He needs some good news, doesn't he? Because he's got some type of illness, and there's a very good possibility the type of illness could end his life. So he needs some good news. He's wanting something now. And sometimes that's what changes people's mind when they want something from you. And that seems to be what's took place here. I don't know that it's actually changed his true feelings toward Elisha, because as you read on, you'll see how he reacts to him and how he talks to him and the things he does. He says there in verse 8, he tells Hazael, he says, Take a present in thine hand and go meet the man of God. What do you think that says about how he feels toward Elisha? What is he thinking? He says, take a present. He says, take a gift. What's he saying? I believe he's saying he thinks Elisha can be bought. Elisha can, if I give him enough money or enough gifts, he'll give me a good report back. And he's kind of thinking the lines of what he might have been able to do with the sorcerers or the soothsayers. You know, you could pay them and get some good news. You could get what you wanted from them. So in a sense, that's what he's doing here. He really didn't have any great deal of respect, I don't think, for him than he did for the sorcerers and the soothsayers. So again, he thought he could buy some good news from Elisha. Well, but Elisha's going to give him the truth, isn't he? And that's what a prophet is to do, a true prophet. They have to give the truth, the whole truth. And that's what he's going to do. Now, what you do with the truth and what Hazael will do with the truth, well, that's two different things sometimes, isn't it? You know, the truth that we receive and then the truth, how much of it do we share? And we'll find out how much he shares when he goes back to the king. But he says there in verse 9, speaking of Hazael, it says, he took a present with him, even of every good thing of Damascus. How much did he take? I don't know, but it took 40 camels to carry it all. So that was the, well, they used to say that's the tractor and trailers of the desert. And that's what it took. That means to take whatever gifts he had sent to Elisha. You know, as I read that, I thought, well, you know, there's a great truth that we'll see here, and that is this, that great wealth, it can't purchase life no more than great property can purchase life. Neither one can do that for us, can it? And so he could have sent all the wealth of Syria and Damascus and still not saved his life, even though the disease, we'll find out, was not going to be what would take his life. But it made me think of the story there we read in Luke chapter 12. The story tells us of a man there in Luke 12:16. a few verses. It says, and he spake a parable, the Lord, he spake a parable unto them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits. And he said, this will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. And he says in verse 20, and God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? And he says in verse 21, he says, so is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So we'll see that God will have the last say on this, won't he? Anyway, I thought about, there was a quote that I'd read years ago. I believe it was Queen Elizabeth I. It was something she said on her deathbed. And she was very wealthy. They said she had hundreds of dresses in her closet. It's just beautiful, the things that she owned. But as she was on her deathbed, she made this statement. She said, all my possessions for a moment of time. And that's kind of where the king was at. He would have gave all his possessions, I think, just to live another day. And probably a lot of us, we want to live, but that's where he found himself in that position. Here in verse 13 or verse 9. I'll get scrambled up here in a minute. So we read on into verse 10. I'm just going through and looking at some of the statements that have been made here. But he says in verse 10, the answer is given. Let's read verse 10. It says here, and Elisha said unto him, go, say unto him. Now here's what Elisha said. He says, go, say unto him, thou mayest certainly recover. He says, howbeit the Lord hath showed me that he shall surely die. Now one commentator, he said, it almost seems like Elisha speaking out both sides of his mouth. He says one thing and then he says another. Well, which is it? Am I going to recover or am I going to die? So he's not going to die from the disease, but something else is going to take his life. And he doesn't really expound on that. But I think the one that he's telling this to, he knows. Maybe he senses it and he knows the answer. He may know what he's going to die of. He may know what's going to be the cause of Ben-Hadad's death. So he seems to be giving mixed messages. But he has here, and I put for myself, I think he has what I would call the burden of a prophet. He knows what will happen to Ben-Hadad, and he knows by whose hand that will happen. Sometimes we think, well, I would like to know the future. I'd like to know all these things. But I tell you what, sometimes I think maybe I wouldn't like to know all these things. Because if we knew the future, we'd worry ourselves to death, wouldn't we? And we would. But, that was a burden that the prophets had to carry. They knew. God would reveal to them the outcome of things. So this was a burden, I believe, that Elisha and Elijah and the other prophets, they had to carry. And really all they could do was watch. They could share the word, but they weren't allowed to intervene and to change things. It's not like Back to the Future, the movie. You can't go and they always say, don't do this. You'll change history. You'll change everything. So it didn't work that way. But he had knowledge that God had allowed him to have. Now we'll find that this Hazael that's being mentioned here, if we were just to read this, well, he's just a servant. He's just a servant of the king. He's just a worker. But we go back into 1 Kings chapter 19, we'll see what Elijah had to say about this person. So in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 15 and 16, he says here, and the Lord said unto him, to Elijah, he says, go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, he says, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Now, that's what Elijah had prophesied. Well, how is that going to come to pass? Well, we're going to see how that comes to pass, how he will reign in the place of Ben-Hadad. But he also says some other things here. He says in verse 16, God's way ahead of the game, isn't he? He already knew what was going to happen. He's already shared it in a sense, all the way back in 1 Kings there. But it says, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel. And then he even mentions Elisha, and he says Elisha, the son of Shaphat, of Abel Mahalola. Some of these I can't pronounce, but we'll try. But he says, shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. So God had already prophesied through Elijah that Hazael would be king. So God already knew the outcome, didn't he? And God already knew how it was going to happen also. So God is He's in the know. You know, it made me think about there at the Last Supper when Christ he knew that he would be betrayed, and he knew who the betrayer was. Nobody else in the room seemingly knew, but the Lord knew who it was. There was two people in the room who knew who it was. It was Judas, and it was the Lord. And the same here, I believe that as Elisha had a conversation here with Hazael, I believe he says maybe he didn't know fully what was going to happen, but I believe his heart, there was something in his heart that obviously wasn't right for him to have done, and for Elisha to say, this is what you're going to do. What a horrible person that you are in your heart. So I guess what we could take from verse 10 there is simply that God is omniscient, and we know that, and that God shared his knowledge through his prophets. So that's what he does, doesn't he? He did. He shared that knowledge that he had. But again, the burden that it had to been for Elisha to carry, knowing exactly what he was going to do. He says there in verse 11, part of the verse, he says, and he settled his countenance. Speaking of Elisha, he's told this, but it says that he settled his countenance steadfastly. He stared. He went into a stare. And I believe he was looking directly at Hazael when he was doing this. But we read on steadfastly, and it says, until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. And again, so what a heavy burden that Elisha was realizing. If you look up that little phrase there, he was ashamed, which I went back to the Greek Strong's Concordance. But that little statement, it says he was ashamed. It's saying that he was disappointed. He was disappointed to the point of tears of what was going to take place here and to his people. It also speaks of being confounded. You know, even the prophets, we've talked about how that they were just like us. They were flesh and blood, weren't they? And sometimes I think they had to say, why? Why are you going to allow this to happen? Why are you going to allow this evil person to reign here in Syria, and knowing what he's going to do to the children of Israel? But yet God is going to allow this, and God has his purposes. We don't always understand them, but he has his reasons for allowing things. So again, it was a great burden for Elisha to have this on his life and have to be to share this news. And it made me think back when we several years ago we had went through a series several years ago. I don't know who was in the class even. We went through the books of Nehemiah and Ezra, or Ezra and Nehemiah in order. And the very first chapter there, we find Nehemiah. He gets news of what's going on from the remnant, the captivity, and those that have remained there in Jerusalem. He finds out what's happening. And it says there in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 3, and just another little picture of the prophet. It says, and they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. And it came to pass, Nehemiah, it says, when it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. So I believe here was another example of a prophet with news, and even with Elisha with the knowledge. But it affected them, didn't it? So they had a heart. They had a heart that could be touched for their people. And that we know there was two different individuals. You know, we look at Elijah and we know that in his case, he went about things a little bit differently. He's very straightforward. Some people I work with, they would have said he was hard-nosed because he was very blunt, wasn't he? And Elisha's a little bit different personality, but they both had a heart for their people. So it caused Elisha to weep about the situation that was going to happen. But then in verse 12, Hazael asked the question there. He says, "Why weepest, my Lord?" And he answered, he says, "Because I know the evil that thou wilt do unto the children of Israel." So again, he lets us know. He said, I know what kind of king you're going to be. I know what you're going to do to the children. I know what you're going to do to my people. That had to be a heavy burden to carry. And I think it would be for anybody, wouldn't it? I mean, if you knew today, any of us in here, if we knew, we all go through bad things, right? We all go through good things. Well, I want to know all about all the good things, right? Do you want to know about all the bad things? Well, you can't have it both ways, right? But just think if you had that ability to know those things. Now, that would be a tough situation to be in. But that's where Elisha finds himself. So he's asked the question of, "Why weepest thou, my Lord?" So not only did Elisha know what would happen to his people, but the fact is, I've already kind of stated this, but he knew it would happen. It's one thing to say I know something, but well, maybe I can change it. Maybe I can adjust it a little bit. But he couldn't do any adjusting, could he? He knew that the description that was given of the type of king that Hazael would be, it was going to play out that way. And there wasn't anything he could do. He was in the audience with everybody else. He would just have to watch it take place. So he said he knew it would happen. Elisha was looking, and again, I think he knew. Well, he did know. He was looking at the traitor, and the traitor. One writer talks about there's a good possibility that the traitor, being Hazael, he knew who Elisha was staring at, and maybe there was a little bit of guilt started to come in there, but he wasn't going to change, was he? He was going to do everything that he intended. He's going to do everything that his heart guided him to do. And we look in verse 13. And it says, "And Hazael said," he says, but what? Is thy servant a dog? Now, I don't know, maybe somebody else probably can explain this to me, but to me, I don't, what am I, a dog? Am I just something that's trained, and I have to act it out? Have I no control? I just have to be obedient. Is that what he's saying? Is that, I think that's the question he's asking. He says, "Is thy servant a dog?"
I'm Wesley Hutchin with
that he should do this great thing. Do I have to follow through with this? Do I have to be this kind of king? So what does Elisha do? He reveals things to Hazael about himself. And I thought about, think about Peter when the Lord told him that he would deny him. Did Peter believe that? Well, no. He said, "I would never do that. I would never." And we're all capable of doing things that we can't imagine ourselves doing, aren't we? We are. If we're honest, we are. You get yourself in the right time, the right place, the right situation, the right pressure applied in the right way, and we'll do things. We'll say things. And it's sad, but it's just the human nature that we have. And it's only the Lord that can help us not to do those things. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but just in our flesh, we'll usually bend after some point. You talk to anybody that's been in some of the wars, the POWs and people, just a matter of time that their will can be bent to do what the enemy wants. And maybe that's what's happened or going to happen here with Hazael. But he's asked that question, "Is thy servant a dog?" And I wanted to point out that Elisha reveals things to Hazael about himself he possibly thinks he could never be capable of, but something that we should realize, he's being told these things, but I don't find anywhere that he ever takes the time or the effort to not fulfill Elisha's prophecy. he doesn't do anything to prevent it, does he? He doesn't seem that he wants to prevent it. In verse 14, he goes back to Ben-Hadad. Well, obviously, the first question is Ben-Hadad. He wants some news, and he asks the question. He says, "What said Elisha to thee?" And that he answers, and he answered, "He told me that thou shouldest surely recover." That's all he told him. He didn't do a Paul Harvey, did he? He didn't tell him the rest of the story, because he knew the rest of the story, and it had nothing to do with the disease that Ben-Hadad. So he did tell him the truth, but he only told him half the truth. He says, "He told me that thou shouldest surely recover." So again, he told the truth, but he only told half of it. The other half of the truth was where? It was still in Hazael's heart. It was still to be acted out. And we see that in verse 15. We might actually have a couple minutes left if I can read this real quick. But it says in verse 15, and it says, "And it came," so I think that probably brought some comfort to Ben-Hadad. What do you think? I'm going to get through this. I'm going to live. But he had no idea, did he? He had no idea that the traitor was the one that was telling him, that was bringing him this news. And it came to pass on the morrow, this is speaking of Hazael, that he took a thick cloth and dipped it in water and spread it on his face. Now, any of y'all ever took a big heavy washcloth and got it full of good hot water and put it on your face for whatever reason? You might have sinuses. What does it do to your breathing? Well, it restricts it, doesn't it? So whatever he took and dipped in water, it held enough water to where what did he do? What did he do to the king? He killed him, didn't he? He smothered him to death. He took his life. So it says, then he took a cloth and dipped it in water and spread it on his face so that he died. Well, and what happened? Well, the prophecy all the way from 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 15, it came to pass, didn't it? Because it says there, so that he died, and Hazael reigned in his stead. So Hazael, the one who asked, "Is thy servant a dog, that he should do this thing?" Well, what did he do? Well, he murdered Ben-Hadad. He fulfills the prophecy. And he fulfills the prophecy that Elisha had spoke, where he says, "The Lord hath showed me that thou shalt be king over Syria." And he also fulfilled the prophecy that as well as, "Because I know the evil that thou wilt do unto the children of Israel." So God in his omniscience, it's all played out, hasn't it, to this point? And so the rest of it will also. So even though time had changed Ben-Hadad, it had not necessarily changed him to a point where he had full confidence. He just wanted to get what he could get. And yet he had somebody in his own midst, a trusted servant, that was going to turn on him and take his life and take his throne. So I know we went through it kind of quick. We'll try to continue on through chapter 9 next week. And that's all I have. Appreciate you all. Green light comes on.